بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So I know we're on Zoom. I was mentioning earlier, it's difficult to be interactive like it is in person, where I ask questions and review from last class and stuff like that. But Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, I mean, we're no stranger to him, right? He is Asadullah. He is a person. He says my mother had named me Haydar when I was born, the lion. Uh, and he had prowess like very few companions that we can name. And his story, we're going to only cover a little bit of the introduction. You'll see over here. He's accepting of Islam, his da'wah, and the story of Afif al-Kindi, which is going to be really, really important. But I want you guys to keep in mind, as we're going through the life of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, as usual, try to think of it as what would I do in that situation? Try to think of it as like, if I was in his shoes, what could I have done? What would I have done? Right? And that's really how we should be processing Sirah in the first place. Last Sirah session, I was talking all about this and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind as we go through the life of Ali radiallahu ta'ala. Now, he is, of course, born in the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the first cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they have the same grandfather, who is Abdul Muttalib. And we know Abdul Muttalib, we briefly talked about him. He has 10 children, more or less, according to the narrations. Very respected in Quraysh. Banu Hashim, we talked about, is one of the highest level tribes, most noble tribes in all of Quraysh. Abu Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu is the chief of Banu Hashim during the time of the Prophet ﷺ giving da'wah, which is why he was a big shield, right? Abu Talib, even though he never accepted Islam, he was such a big help in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and no Muslim can really say no about that, right? It's true. And we talked about Fatima bint Asad. I mean, she is one of the most beloved people to the Prophet ﷺ. She accepted Islam. She was nicknamed al Khair, the mother of good. The Prophet ﷺ, whenever he would distribute his wealth, he would, their narrations where it says he would give it to the Fatimatan or the Fatimas. And Fatima bint Asad, his auntie, I mean, like lineage, if you're speaking lineage, is his auntie, but it was really a mother figure in his life, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So she was very beloved to him. Now, you think that if someone is a tribe leader, that they would have everything. They have fame, they have money. I mean, they have it all, you would think. But Abu Talib, radiallahu ta'ala, I mean, you can not say that linguistically, actually, but Abu Talib, he was, I mean, there are narrations talking about how he would come and toil and stuff like that just to put food on the table. There was a lot of financial difficulty in the life of Abu Talib, and he was caring for many children. Each one of these children have a 10-year age gap between them. So Talib, as you can imagine from the name, Abu Talib is the oldest child. Aqil, 10 years younger, another child. Ja'far, 10 years younger, another child. Ali ibn Abi Talib, 10 years younger, another child. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ was around the same age as Talib. And Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he is born, and the Prophet ﷺ decides, along with his uncle Abbas, that you know what? I see Abu Talib struggling. I see how much he's working. And I want to take some load off of his back. So both Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam go to Abu Talib and they ask him, hey, look, I know it's difficult for you. Let us take some of the load off of your back. We will raise some of your children. And Abbas takes, I believe he takes, yeah, sorry, I have to switch between. No, Ja'far and Aqil is right. So Abbas takes, I believe it's Ja'far. The Prophet ﷺ takes Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? Who is at that time 5 years old, 6 years old, which goes to show, number one, the Prophet ﷺ is essentially raising Ali ibn Abi Talib. And there are numerous other people in the house, right? You have Zayd ibn al-Haritha and others. You have his daughters, right? Kulthum, Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, who might not have been born at this point. Kulthum, Ruqayya radiallahu ta'ala anha, Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha. So it's a very big household, but it's a very big house. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, thanks to his marriage to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, and his success in business, he was pretty wealthy. So that just goes to show some of the lineage. Now, here is where things get a lot more interesting and a lot more exciting. Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu is the age of 8. Some narrations say 10 years old. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes to him and tells him about the mission of Islam. Talks to him about the revelation he's got. Tells him about everything that he's seen and experienced. And you wouldn't think of an 8-year-old to have much thought. They're not very deeply thinking. They should be busy playing with their friends and stuff like that. The response of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu when he hears the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam talk about revelation, he says, you know what? Let me think about it. And I need to ask permission from my father. That's what he tells the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he goes that night and he describes what was going through his head. He was thinking about what it entails. Like he knows what it means to accept Islam, right? It's against the state, quote unquote, even though there's no government and stuff like that. It's against the powerful, it's against the elite, it's a new idea. So there's going to be backlash, there's going to be difficulty, and he's thinking about what everything it entails. But at the end of that thought process, he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he tells him, I accepted Islam. He doesn't go talk to Abu Talib about it. This is literally the next morning. He doesn't leave the house, pretty much. This goes to show something really, really important. The fitrah that we talk about within human beings, it's so underestimated. Like, we probably don't even truly feel what it means to have a fitrah because of the state we live in right now in this modern world where every single thing is monopolized, and ever since we're born as little babies we're commoditized with our attention, whatever. Right now it's a lot of technology, so iPads and stuff like that. We're always so busy, we're always so commoditized, we're always so distracted that we probably truly don't get to experience something like that. Our maturity is stunted. Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu is not like that. 8 years old, making a decision like that. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he embraces Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He now goes and gives Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu this very early on. Abu Dharr radiallahu ta'ala anhu comes and he hears about, if you know him, he's also a very notable companion. When he hears what happens in Mecca, he comes over there listening, hoping to listen to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when he enters Mecca, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam knows he's coming. And he sends Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, a little kid, to go ahead and bring him over. And Ali radiallahu ta'ala goes to Abu Dharr al-Ghifari and he tells radiallahu ta'ala anhu and he says, you know what? You want to meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Here's a game plan. Follow me, but keep a large distance. And do not give any indications that we know each other or that we are in communications. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is giving a lot of trust to Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu in difficult situations, which is what we're talking about over here when we say da'wah in difficulty. Okay? This is not supposed to be easy. But this is where development happens. The Prophet ﷺ is entrusting Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu with that, and they succeed. Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu takes Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiallahu ta'ala anhu to the Prophet ﷺ, and Abu Dharr al-Ghifari accepts Islam. And there's a whole story about, he's the first one to say Assalamu alaikum, and so on and so forth. Now, visualize with me here for a second. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he goes on on Mount Safa, and this is his first public call he's ever making. He announces it, tells the people, and I'm not going to go into detail because we've done it before, but he tells the people, long story short, about Islam, and that what the place they're headed right now is not a good place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, was qum fa'anzir. It's a really important lesson over here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him to arise and warn. Allah could have said, qum fabashir, arise and give them good tidings. I mean, you're getting guidance. You follow the guidance, you get Jannah, right? It's good news. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was commanded qum fa'anzir because the society he's going to right now, which is Quraysh, Mecca in general, they're not headed towards Jannah. They have become polytheistic. They say they're on the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam, but they're not. They perverted all of the rituals of Ibrahim alayhi salam into their own version of it. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes up there and he warns everybody. And the mockery comes. And Abu Lahab curses the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the first people described to stand up that day to support the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Ali radiallahu ta'ala. He raises his hand and he says, I believe in you, Ya Rasulullah, I believe in you. Is it any surprise to see the courage Ali radiallahu ta'ala would display in the rest of his life? It starts over here. It goes to show for us how our lives can have microcosms that we don't pay attention to. We talk about, the journey we have in this dunya towards Jannah, that we want to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then we are too busy for the Quran all across the year. I mean, Ramadan is the only time we would open the Quran. Otherwise, we're busy studying at university, working our job, and all of these different things. Fasting also, it's just a Ramadan thing. How many of us really fast outside of it? Qiyamul Layl, standing up for Qiyamul Layl, oh, that's difficult. My sleep, I need to catch a lot more sleep. Sunnah prayers, oh man. As soon as I finish my fard, I gotta run. I got business to handle. And it's not a one-time thing. It's all year round we do it. So what are we talking about when we say we're making a journey to Jannah? So Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, very early on, you can see it, how it displays the courage he's showing. Then comes the story of Afif al-Kindi. Afif al-Kindi, he accepts Islam later on. And he becomes a Sahabi, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But he recalls an early sight, all right? He works very closely with Al-Abbas. Al-Abbas, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, is uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he's also a very big businessman, all right? And so Afif al-Kindi works under Abbas, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he goes over there one time for a business, whatever business deal, transaction or something like that. And when he arrives in Mecca, he finds a young boy and a woman behind that young boy. And then there's the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam standing in front. So he sees these three people, and they're standing in front of the Kaaba. I mean, they're not literally praying to the Kaaba. The Qibla is Masjid al-Aqsa, right? But they situate themselves where the Kaaba falls in between them. And you can imagine what it's like. Like there's idols everywhere surrounding the Kaaba and everything. And for him, this was just such an unusual sight, a ritual he's never seen before. He's watching curiously as they're bowing and prostrating. And then he asks his host, Al-Abbas radiallahu ta'ala, about the scene. And Al-Abbas radiallahu ta'ala responds, he says, this man, his name is Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He announced a deen, that he has revelation from God. The one standing beside him is Ali ibn Abi Talib, his cousin. And the woman, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. They're the only ones that are practicing this deen. Not literally, but at least the ones you're seeing. Afif al-Kindi. And you need to understand how early on this is. This is like probably a few days after revelation at most. Because years later, Afif al-Kindi, when he accepted Islam, he would cry so much. Because he would recall the moment he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he would say, man, I wish I could have been the fourth person. I could have been the fourth. I could have been the fourth. Everything that now he's not going to hear about when it comes to the struggles in Mecca, the boycott that they had to go through, Isra wal Mi'raj, seeking Nusra from the other tribes, seeking power and authority, then the Hijrah to Medina, then the battles, the Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, the conquests that would happen, the entire journey. He would hear about it and he would think, man, that could have been me. Think about this for a second. Today we have a situation unfounded in Islamic history. The oppression and suffering that we're seeing all around the world. Some people have become passive. They're thinking, this is Allah's decree. What can we do about it? I just need to focus on my own life. Some of them are against it. There are Muslims that are legitimizing the secular nation-state model. They're apologetic to Zionism. They might be a very small minority, but they exist. And then there's a minority, very small minority, that is working to solve the issue, that does the root cause analysis and is working to revive the deen of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to rectify the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When you see people like that, do you think to yourself, yeah, you know what? May Allah bless them. I'm going my own way. Because that's literally what Afif al-Kindi is thinking. That's his mentality. They're very, they have personal ambitions that they never think beyond. Like us today, we have our nanny state, right? The nanny state, we call it. Because the state gives us everything we want. Gives us money, it covers, our basic needs, gives us welfare for the poor. The police service comes to handle any conflicts. It gives us everything. Why would I ever criticize our nanny state? Much less rebel against it. If we have this mentality, then we are not going to find ourselves any different than Afif al-Kindi. No problem. Okay. And subhanAllah, this moment is it's almost like a repeat of history. Remember when Ibrahim alayhi salam, he takes his wife and kids, like this, right? Hajar, you can put like this, alayhi salam, and Ismail alayhi salam. What is it? A man, a wife, and his child. They're standing in front of the Kaaba and they're praying. You have to make a mark right. You guys see the parallel? To make a mark here. Ibrahim alayhi salam, Hajar alayhi salam, and Ismail alayhi salam. A family praying in front of the Kaaba. Nobody else started there. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, and Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. It gives a bit of a meaning. I mean, I remember this a lot of the times when I'm reciting the verse at the end of Surah Al-Furqan. الذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما. That those that make dua, talking about the righteous people, those that make dua, that, oh Allah, give me from my spouse and my children a coolness for my eyes, and make us role models for the pious, or the ones that are always in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, conscious of His commands. It's a dua that we should make when we hear these stories. That we, no matter what ambition we have when it comes to this material world, we want to be like the ones Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored, like Ibrahim alayhi salam, standing with his family in front of the Kaaba, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, standing with his family in front of the Kaaba. May Allah make us like them. Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and carry their legacy. And I'll end with this is a much more light-hearted narration that shows the relationship between Ali radiallahu ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The one time, Ali radiallahu ta'ala, he was sitting and he was eating dates with some of the other companions. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he goes to Ali radiallahu ta'ala and he sits down. And this was dates like Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu earned from a hard day's labor. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he saw there was no seeds in front of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, right? Because Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was eating the dates and he was putting the seeds with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when other Sahaba would come, he's like, look, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had eaten everything and he had left nothing from me. That's what he was saying. So the other companions would come and they're like, what's going on over here? Why are you hogging all of the dates from Ali radiallahu ta'ala? Which wasn't the case. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't doing that. Ali radiallahu ta'ala who was just pushing the date seeds into the pile of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when the Prophet ﷺ heard this, he responded to what Ali radiallahu ta'ala was doing as a joke. And he says, you're the one who's swallowing all of the seeds, and you're blaming me for eating all of your dates. And so all the companions around there would begin laughing. And this is the type of closeness that the Prophet ﷺ would enjoy with Ali radiallahu ta'ala. Often we imagine the stressful situations where everybody's always on guard. Everybody's always silent when the Prophet ﷺ is around them. By the way, am I cutting off? I feel like my internet is slowing down sometimes because of where I am. Okay.
We can hear you, bro.
Okay, that's good. So there's a level of closeness that they have with the Prophet ﷺ, which goes to show that the mission is heavy. The mission is heavy. But no matter how heavy it is, we don't give up the human element that we have in our lives.
Yesterday you lived.
It doesn't always have to be that when you're meeting, you're always talking about, the mission. You're always reminding each other about every single thing that we must do. It's almost like a blueprint, like a military blueprint that we always have to keep check on. There is strategy and there is obedience and dedication required, inevitably. But there are also memories that you make along the way, people that you surround yourself with. And as we know, on the Day of Judgment, it's something that every single human being will remember every single thing that they did. No matter how terrible your memory is over here in this world right now, because you're scrolling on your phone all day, you're watching movies and this and that, your dopamine receptors are fried. And so you can't really hold any information long term. It just comes in from one ear, you hold on to it maybe an hour, a day, maybe a week, and then it goes out the other end. The Day of Judgment, you'll remember every single thing. The conversations we're having right now, probably even this lecture that we're sitting in right now. Every single thing that we will remember. And it softens me, or at least puts a smile on my face to imagine even the jokes, the lightheartedness, the closest that we would have in this world when we're united with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after we pass away. So that's another thing that we can take from the life of Ali radiallahu ta'ala. So as recap, I know this was a very short session. It might have been a bit boring because usually in our in the Sira session we go very quickly into the middle of the life where the battles happen, where a lot more intense moments in the life happen. Even though this was a bit of an introduction, I hope there was a lot for us to apply to ourselves. Number one, understanding the level of maturity required. Ali radiallahu ta'ala was 8 years old when he accepted Islam. And he thought about things deeply. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam took him seriously. Most of us, if we have something serious, we wouldn't even go to our 8-year-old child, ask them advice on something, talk about, have a deep discussion about life with them. They're 8 years old. We wouldn't even think of that. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes to him and he presents Islam in a serious manner to Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. It reminds me of the story of Muhammad Fatih, rahimahullah ta'ala, when his mother would take him to the shore of not Constantinople, but before Constantinople, take him to the shores where he can see the walls of Theodosius. And she would point at it and say, you're going to grow up. I mean, he's 4 years old. Does he even know how to form coherent sentences? Who knows? He probably does. But, his mother points at the walls of Theodosius and says, you're going to grow up and you're going to conquer that place. Number one, there's one thing where she understands, she has the political analysis to know that her husband's not going to do it, right? That he's going to strategize towards it and make progress, but he's not going to be able to do it. But she is dedicated to the mission. And she puts him up to that standard, her child, 4-year-old child. She puts standards sky high. And they reach it. The Prophet ﷺ did the same with Ali radiallahu ta'ala. Standards up here. And so his maturity level skyrockets. If you have ever given da'wah, the sure way to destroy it is to think lowly of the other person you're giving da'wah to. Guaranteed, like it's over. The development that person is going to have right now is going to be so destroyed. A fundamental tenet whenever you're giving da'wah to anybody is recognizing the potential. You have to believe, first of all, that they're going to be the greatest of the greatest. And that's not something you know entirely. That's only known to Allah. You don't know that when you're talking to another brother or another sister, what they're going to grow up to be. Maybe they're in a difficult moment in life right now. And you see the numbers, how much money they're making or what their marks are in university. And you're thinking like, this person got much. I don't think they're going to be anybody really when they grow up. That's a sure way to destroy it. The human potential is something that time and time again we realize destroys expectations. David Blaine was a magician really popular like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. He shattered over 10 world records, each of which was thought scientifically by doctors and others to be impossible, that any human being would die under that circumstances. And he completely redefined what it means to be a human being during those times. Whether or not all of it was true is entirely different because, David Blaine is Jewish. He was connected to a lot of shady people. So obviously media can paint insincere ideas and levels and standards. But I personally do believe a lot of it was true. So you have to believe when you're giving da'wah to somebody that they can be amazing. They can realize their potential. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the opportunity to be part of their journey. You can be somebody that pushes them up. It's a great opportunity given from Allah. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what was he leaving when he left this world? Was he leaving money? Was he leaving, books? No. He wasn't leaving any of those things. On his deathbed, he looked across, he pulls the curtain out, and he sees his companions. That's what he left behind. The companions. Radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. And that's exactly what we should hope to leave behind. When we're standing on our deathbed, we should imagine to leave behind the relationships we nurtured in this life. for the mission of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to establish His deen. So take that deeply, right? This took me, it took me a while to learn this myself, putting limits on myself and other people. It's a sure way to destroy your da'wah right from the start. So I truly believe every single person in this call, I'm not doing this to exaggerate, I'm not doing this out of fake humbleness, that you guys can be some of the most influential people within your generation. You realize your potential. But it's both up to you and myself to realize what are those pathetic versions of ourselves, those habits, those changes that we're avoiding, that we need to step into in order to realize something like that and truly make this life worth living. I mean, what are we defined by at the end of the day? We're not defined by what we do. We're not defined by what we make. We're not defined by our career. We're not defined by how many children we have. We're not defined by our spouse. Those aren't the things that fundamentally define us. A person is defined by their mission. A person is defined by what they live for, their moral compass, their reason of existence, their purpose. That mission is supposed to define us. And that's what we should turn our attention towards. Always on the top of our minds, it should be how we can push each other up, how we can work together and reach those standards. So, I mean, Ali radiallahu ta'ala is a perfect example of reaching standards. Then, of course, the da'wah difficulty just goes to show how the Prophet ﷺ doubled down on that. Who here would give a crucial task to like a 10-year-old, 11, maybe 12-year-old kid? But the Prophet ﷺ literally, the Islam of Abu Dharr al-Ghifari was on Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu guiding him. And the Prophet ﷺ trusted him with that. So if you're leading any da'wah initiatives and you always think that I'm going to do everything myself because, who else is as capable as me? That's not a good way to think about it either. Prophet ﷺ entrusted to the Sahaba because not only are the Sahaba themselves very responsible people, but the Prophet ﷺ wants them to develop. He wants them to see what it feels like to operate at a high level. And that's exactly what Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu learned in that. And so if you have tasks that you're doing as a da'wah lead, sure, if you give it to somebody else, they might not do as good of a job as you. That's probably true. But guess what? Eventually they will. And that will enable you to do something else. That will enable you to put your time into something that's even greater. So sometimes you have to give it up. And you have to trust the people you know. I mean this with a due full respect. Is there more seerah lore material? Not today. This is going to be the end of today's. We're only doing a little bit of an introduction, particularly because last 10 nights of Ramadan. I want some of the lessons to be really relevant as well, instead of just going through the seerah. And Dawah and difficulty, the story of Afif al-Kindi, as we elaborated on earlier, take every interaction seriously. You don't want to be in his position where you're standing decades later, if not years later, and you see all of the work being done. Islam is established. Masjid al-Aqsa is liberated from the hands of the oppressors. And you're there, man, where was I? Where was I when I saw it all happening? Don't be in that position. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be from those that are used as the army to liberate Masjid al-Aqsa from the hands of the oppressors, Ameen, and make us from the Sabiqun. In Ya Rabbil Alameen. So we'll continue the rest of the story of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu next week. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot it right now. Otherwise, I will share like a 10 minutes reminder that I think will be really beneficial for these last 10 nights of Ramadan.
I just
Hello? You think you cut out. Was that just me? Or did
No, he did spoke, but yeah, now he's speaking.
you have a question?
can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, okay. No, I wasn't saying I have a question. You just asked for like a little bit of reflections, but I watched. I think I don't know if I sent it here, but there's a video of this one sales guy online. He does this business for sales, and he was saying the same concept which you just mentioned, right? Where you're believing that whatever you're selling, you have to have conviction if you want the chances for it to sell more. Belief is conviction in what you're believing in. Um like what you're selling is one of the most important. I can send the video over here, and that just plays a part of like when you're selling to someone, for example, Islam, and you're doing da'wah to someone. The belief in them and in their potential is very very important because only then, if you believe in it, then because that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to make them believe in themselves and for them to change. So it has to start from you. Send the video over, but what you said is really good, mashallah.
Send it. It'll be best if you send it in the WhatsApp. See your WhatsApp, so everybody can see it over there, even those that didn't attend.
Yeah. Okay, inshallah.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize this because of either it's ego, arrogance, ego, and stuff like that. That they don't see the potential in other people, and they always think of themselves as high and mighty. So they never really get very far. They might go very fast for a short while, but they'll burn out without anybody else. Or they don't realize it because they're too shy. They're too shy to go out and be part of somebody else's life. Unfortunate case. But those who can overcome those two, you're not too arrogant, and you're not too shy, find our reward with Allah Azza wa Jal. Mm. Second. All right. So I'll just give my short reminder when it comes to uh, the last 10 nights of Ramadan and the things, something to keep in mind that I think will be of real benefit for these last 10 nights. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He talks about Laylatul Qadr in a manner that is like none other. We know the reward better than 1,000 months. It's something that we really can't comprehend. I think every single second comes out to something like 683 minutes, which is like 10 hours. I don't know if I heard that somewhere. I didn't do the math myself. But it's incomprehensible to us how much Laylatul Qadr really matters. And it's not necessarily that it's in the odd nights either. That's not like 100% established type thing. There is a possibility it could be an even night. It could just be somewhere in the last 10 nights, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala why he says 10 nights in the Quran, which is why the Prophet emphasizes on 10 nights. He doesn't emphasize on 5 nights, every odd night or anything like that. Even though we have a lot more evidence to show that it's more likely on the odd nights. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or actually the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, this is a night where the angels they take your deed up to Allah, and Allah also brings a decree down from Lawh al-Mahfuz to Baytul Izzah. Right? Baytul Izzah is where the angels are in the first heaven. That's where, for example, according to majority of scholars, the Quran was revealed like that, right? From Lawh al-Mahfuz, it came down to Baytul Izzah in the night of Qadr, Laylatul Qadr, and then from Baytul Izzah over 23 years, Jibreel alayhi salam would carry it to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Okay? Dua changes qadr. We've heard that before, right? Dua changes qadr. And so in the last 10 nights, we always imagine ourselves that we want to make sure we are making a lot of dua. We want to make sure the usual things that we've heard, from iftar, you don't backbite, you don't slander, you don't put anyone down in any negative way. You protect your tongue from all of that so that you don't put your Laylatul Qadr to waste and you don't fall into sins that take away from the reward that you're seeking from Allah. And that you go to the mosque for masjid for if you're male, if you go to the masjid for Isha in Jama'ah, you go to the masjid for Fajr in Jama'ah, you make time for Qiyamul Layl, you make time to read Quran, you make time for dhikr, and you make a lot of time for dua, and you make all the dua that you want. We know all of this stuff. But what we don't really realize is a lot of the time we fall into the thing where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in chapter 17 of the Quran, Surah Al-Isra, He says, وَيَدْعُ الْإِنسَانُ بِالشَّرِّ دُعَاءَهُ بِالْخَيْرِ. The human swiftly prays for evil as he prays for good. He makes dua for shar as he makes dua for khair. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا. And the human being is so hasty, so impatient with what he seeks. So what is this talking about over here? We know that dua is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really, whenever He hears His slave make dua, He responds it in multiple ways. Either He responds to it by granting you the dua, or He replies it like in a delayed manner where the dua is replied to maybe years down the road or decades down the road. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to the dua by removing an obstacle that would have been there in the future because of this dua. Maybe He necessarily doesn't answer the dua directly, but He protects you from something in the future because of the dua that you made. Or, and this is the final one, you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment with the du'as that you made that weren't answered. Okay? And there's a hadith about this. The Prophet ﷺ says, on the day of judgment, a man will come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with mountains of good deeds. And he will ask Allah, Ya Allah, I didn't do any of these things. Like, where are these good deeds even coming from? I just saw my entire life flash before my eyes. You played it for me, and it doesn't look like what my life deserves. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. It's not a verbatim hadith, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replies to this slave of his, and He says, these good deeds are the du'as that you made in this world that I did not sort of reply to or give you the immediate answer to. And in that moment, this man or this person, they will regret that they didn't make more dua in this world, so that it would not be replied and they would find it on the day of judgment. Why do I say this? A lot of people hesitate to make du'as that are very, very ambitious because they, as I mentioned earlier in the verse, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا, they're ever impatient. Making dua for me to be part of the liberation of Palestine. Oh man, is that really, that's not even possible, is it? Me? Little old me being part of some mission so big? So a lot of people have these artificial limitations on their mind when it comes to making dua. Don't have it. All right? From this hadith, we find that we shouldn't have any limitations on the dua that we make. Do we not believe? In fact, it shows a little bit of lack of belief in Allah, that He is not able to grant what He wishes. I mean, look at the Anbiya. Zakaria alayhi salam, he's old man, white hair. He's impotent at that point, and he knows it. And his wife is barren. And yet he makes dua for a child. Does he know how it's going to happen? Heck no. He has no idea how it's going to happen, because the material causes aren't there. But he makes a dua anyways. So that's one thing. If you're going to make dua in these last 10 nights, sincerely make dua for big things, for things that you deem to be extremely important. Secondly, the Prophet ﷺ says on what do you call it? Laylatul Qadr, a person will be walking, وَإِنَّكَ لَتَرَى رَجُلٌ يَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ أَسْوَأَ وَقَدْ وَقَعَ اسْمُهُ فِي الْمَوْتِ. A person will be walking and their name had been written on that year for that they will die. Okay? That he was talking about the Qadr Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives on Laylatul Qadr, really. And so Make dua for how you want to die. I I feel like sometimes I feel like I shouldn't be mentioning this stuff, but I have discussions with people on what they make du'as for, and I realize, man, make dua for how you want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Give you a good death, right? Give you give you a death where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you, and do not take your soul until He is pleased with you. And also i'tikaf, we knew last 10 nights. All right. A lot of people, when they're doing i'tikaf, they're doing it because their friends are going there. We have a narration where the Prophet ﷺ went to do i'tikaf, and Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha heard that, and she went to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, Ya Rasulullah, can I pitch my tent beside yours? And the Prophet ﷺ said, sure. He gave her permission. And when Hafsa radiallahu ta'ala heard this, I mean, she's always with Aisha radiallahu ta'ala like this, right? Hafsa radiallahu ta'ala. They're similar in age, and their personalities are closer to each other as well. So when she hears of this, she tells Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, ask the Prophet sallallahu for the same for me. And she does, and the Prophet sallallahu gives her permission. Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha, she hears of this, and she gets worked up. And she's like, wait, this is rivalry, this is competition. Like, this is like unfair treatment over here. I need to go and pitch my tent over there. And she goes and she pitches her tent as well. And the Prophet sallallahu, and this is all in the masjid, by the way, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam walks out of his tent and he sees these tents around his, and he's like, what's going on over here? And his wife explained to him, and he says, did they intend to please Allah with this? A rhetorical question he's asking. Did they intend to please Allah with this? And he immediately takes his tent, he packs it up, and he's like, I'm not doing i'tikaf. I'm done. I'm leaving. Why? He's worried about the relationship with Allah. These last 10 nights are so sacred. Even something as much as thinking of another person instead of Allah can alter your intention. And that's something the Prophet ﷺ is not ready to give up. So it's something for us to ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? If we're doing i'tikaf especially. And if we're doing i'tikaf, how are the nights in i'tikaf being spent? I'll tell you, it would usually happen in the masjids. It's all a lot of talking about topics that aren't really even Islamic, to be honest. And joking around and messing around and sleepless nights. Imagine what the Prophet ﷺ would say in that moment. Right? And the final thing is the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ says, رَبِيعَةُ قُلُوبِنَا وَنُورُ صُدُورِنَا. The Quran is the spring of our hearts and the light of our chests. And the Prophet ﷺ also said the heart that has no Quran in it is al-bayt al-kharb. It's a home in ruins. If your heart has no Quran in it, it's a home of ruins. So if you haven't gotten to memorizing the Quran at all, take these last 10 nights as a serious endeavor. Even if it's just one small surah, 3 lines of the Quran. Light your heart with the Quran. There's a hadith where when you pass away, when a person dies, his body is shrouded and he's put in the grave. And after the burial, when the 2 angels, right, they're supposed to come, Munkar and Nakir, and question you about the grave, there's also a white figure that comes with a pale face. And he says, Araftani, do you know who I am? And the person in the grave says, no, I don't know who you are. And this pale person says, I am your companion, the Quran. I am the person that kept you thirsty on the hot days and I kept you awake at night. I prevented you from indulging in desire and listening to forbidden things. And today, you will find me a loyal companion. And then he says, do not worry, la tahzan. After the questioning of Munkar and Nakir, you will never experience sorrow after this day. Think about that. You will never experience sorrow after this day. Have you guys heard the narrations of what people feel on the day of judgment? The amount of stress and anxiety, drowning in their own sweat. They're being punished in the grave with a whip that literally breaks them down into dust again and again, and Allah puts them back together and they're whipped again, and they're still praying, Ya Allah, don't let the day of judgment come. I would rather experience this immense pain of being whipped into dust than meet the day of judgment. This is talking about the wrongdoers. This is not a joke. And you have the Quran coming to you in your grave saying you'll never experience sorrow after this day. Wouldn't we want that? That the squeeze of the grave is the last sorrow we'll feel? The question of Munkar and Nakir is the final sorrow we'll ever feel, or the final worry we would ever feel? And of course, after this questioning ends, the hadith says the Quran ascends above your grave, requesting a mattress and covering from Jannah, and he is granted it, also with a lamp and fragrant flowers and other descriptions. So may Allah allow us to take these last 10 nights seriously. And beyond memorization, it should go without saying, is acting on the Quran. Right? The Prophet ﷺ complains, this is in Surah Furqan, إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا. My people have done hijrah away from this Quran. And if you really applied this verse to any time in Islamic history, it applies now more than ever. We as an ummah have strayed far from the Quran. We have done hijrah away from it. It exists in the shelves, in the hearts of people, but to put it where it belongs, as a constitution for all of mankind, no. We're far from that, right? May Allah forgive us for our shortcomings. So also think about what you can do to act on the Quran, to spread the word, carry that light to other people. You have other brothers or other sisters you know, reach out to them to meet up in Ramadan, these last 10 nights, or even in the day. This is also one of the most rewardable things you can do. One of the most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to give da'wah. And that is literally living out the Quran. So I know a lot of sort of broken advices, but I hope there was some benefit in it at least. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.